So last week we did a short mini tour here in Catalonia. We rode from Girona to Olot via the Via Verdes, and then we took some back roads back into town, passing through Banyoles, all the while playing ping pong and riding through medieval villages. And I thought, what better way to review a bike than just take it on the tour? So that's what I did. Barely a few days in my possession, I decided to take the Pelago Airisto on tour, breaking the bike touring wisdom of never taking something on tour that you've never used before. How did the bike do? Let's find out. So Pelago is a Finnish brand. I've been aware of their existence, but in the US, you never really see their bikes, just like a rack here and there, which is a bit of a shame because the bikes are actually pretty cool and interesting for a reasonable price, at least here in the EU now. The Airisto Outback is their touring slash bike packing bike. It comes in two flavors. There is a commuter build and this bike packing build. The main differences are some of the controls and handlebars are different, as well as the gearing and the drivetrain. The commuter build uses an internally geared hub, and the Outback version here uses the good old-fashioned derailleur. The frame and fork are made out of 4130 chromoly. It's got double eyelets, both front and rear, so you can run both racks and fenders. Here it's up with fenders as well as the Pelago Rasket, which is a combo rack slash basket. What's pretty cool is that this is the stock build and it's really nicely outfitted. You get metal fenders, you get a dynamo hub. The gravel tires on the bike are 35mm G1s by Schwalbe. A little narrow personally for my taste. You can run up to, I believe, 47mm tires without the fenders. And the drivetrain on this build is good old Dior 10-speed. It's supposed to be spec'd out with Qs, but you know, it's 2024. Who knows what's going to happen? The handlebar is by Pelago. It's got a great angled sweepback, which I love for my wrist, although I do wish they were a little bit wider. Moving down to the crank, it has a wisely spec'd 34-tooth chainring, and I like that they did this, especially for one by. A lot of bikes that are, you know, meant for touring or bike packing tend to come with a 40 tooth for whatever reason. It coming with a 34 tooth chainring, at least to me, means that someone gave it some thought. Before we leave the crank area, you'll notice it has an eccentric bottom bracket. So what this means is that you can run an internal gear hub, Shimano Affine, or even a roll-off hub, or if you're a masochist, run it single speed and be able to tension that chain. Another detail I love is that it does have a stop at the bottom, so you can run a front derailleur. Remember, 2x is the new 1x, but twice as good. This is a stock build. I think it's pretty well thought out, except for like one or two things. And the MSRP is, it comes out to about 1,500 euro. As of February 2024, it's pretty close to USD. So think like maybe 1,600 US dollars. For how well it's spec'd out, I think that's actually pretty good value. I know some of you are already asking, how's it compare to the Rivendell Platypus or a bike like the Soma Buena Vista? We will get to that at the end. In terms of geometry, the head tube angle is 71.5 and it's got a pretty large rake at 63. Combined with the tires, the trail is fairly low at 51. The chainstay length or rear center is a little bit dependent on where it's set in the bottom bracket, but it's roughly 440. The Airisto has another twin in the Pelago line called the Hanko, which is essentially the same bike but with a level top tube. I know what some of you are asking, why review the step-through frame? Knowing my body proportions, you know, I have shorter legs, you know, relative to my height. If I were to ride a level top tube bike and use the good old standover rule, in order for me to get sufficient standover, the frame would essentially be too small in other areas. The stack would be too low, and cockpit would be too short. However, a bike like the Airisto with a step-through frame allows me to ride a larger bike, which is more appropriate in terms of the stack height I want and the reach I want, and still have plenty of standover clearance. This is essentially the same thinking that goes into compact road geometry and also mountain bikes. Mountain bikes are basically step-through bikes. There you go, I said it. So how does the bike ride? I know it looks like kind of a clunky bike share bike, but it rides the complete opposite. Because of the bike's relatively low trail and its swept back bars, the bike is surprisingly nimble. The steering is quick and responsive, making it an agile city bike. And while the bike doesn't sport road bike acceleration, it's still pretty quick off the block. Also, I think despite its weight, I don't know if I mentioned its weight, but as you see it here, it's a little bit chonky at 34 pounds. Despite the weight though, it actually climbs pretty well. Big hat tip to that reasonably spec'd 34 tooth chainring. And truth be told, if I had my druthers, I would have wished that it would come with an 1150 rather than just that 1143. I feel like it only makes sense that, if you have a heavier bike, spec it out with lower gearing. It's not a road bike. Don't put road bike gearing on it. Standing and climbing on the bike felt super natural and not awkward. I feel like the sweep of the bars puts you right in that sweet spot right over the center of the bike. With steep, slow speed climbing, although the front end did kind of shimmy a little bit, it wasn't throwing the entire bike around, and I attribute that, specifically to the lower trail. That's where low trail really shines. So while the front did have a tendency to flop, with that heavy load, it didn't lead to excessive wandering. I found personally that in the middle speeds, let's say between 10 to 20 miles per hour, is where the bike felt most at home. On faster descents, the bike still felt really nimble, for better or for worse. It didn't have that high trail bike sensation of having you locked into a line. So the upside is that it felt really easy to correct. The downside, however, is that you can't phone home a descent, or at least I can't, typically speaking, with a low trail bike. A good contrast to this is the Marin Muirwoods, which is a very high trail bike. On the Muirwoods, it was super stable on the descent. Past a certain speed, you weren't so much steering the bike as like kind of aiming the whole thing. The Airisto, on the other hand, you definitely have to be a little bit more present when descending on this bike. This is definitely magnified on more technical and rocky descents. Because of the big load and the low trail, there's a tendency for, when you hit a rock wrong, the front end of the bike feels like it gets deflected a lot easier. I think another way to explain it is that it doesn't quite have the roll over ability over all the things. Partially because of the tires, they are fairly narrow in my opinion at 35, but also because of the front end geometry. So let's talk about the tires a little bit. The G1s roll great, but they are a little narrow for bike packing at just 35 millimeters. They definitely roll fast on pavement, but weren't ideal when things got rough. In fact, since you have to run them at higher pressures, it just made the whole ride a little bit stiff. In the spectrum of bike travel, this is more of a road-oriented touring bike than it is an off-road bike packer. It depends on how semantic you want to get, but for me, in its kind of stock configuration, it's better suited towards pavement riding. Again, it does have the capability to run wider tires, 45, 47. You would lose the fender, but it would be more capable off-road. Frankly, I think if Pelago really wanted to do a truly off-road version of the Airisto, lose the fenders, I know, you're gonna get wet. Put in some big meats, either 700 by 45s or 650 by 50s. Spec it out with a proper mullet, and also bars that are a little bit wider, just so you can muscle it through the rough stuff. Let's talk about the rasket. This is Pelago's combo basket slash rack. It performed really well, no rattle whatsoever. It is super sturdy. They've got really nice execution with the stays that do have some adjustability at the bottom. Thing is solid, it's like a brick. And that's also the downside. It also is a little bit weighty. I think the rasket alone is about 1,600 grams. We're looking at 3.5, almost 4 pounds that you're adding to the bike. Weight aside, having the rasket on the bike essentially makes the single-legged kickstand useless. There's just too much wheel flop. If you're gonna run the rasket on a bike, I'd suggest getting a double-legged kickstand so it's actually usable. Okay, what are the pros and cons, and how does it compare to other bikes? Let's talk pros. First off, I think it looks great. It's very classy, but I love this matted paint. It gives it a very utilitarian, slightly tactical look and feel to it. I think for the money, again, we're looking at about 1,500 euro, 1,600 USD. It's really well spec'd. I mean, you get high quality metal fenders, you get dynamo lighting, and you get well thought out gearing. Another big pro was the handling. It was surprisingly fun and nimble with a load and also without a load. Other pros is that it's got some fun bike nerdy things, again, like the eccentric bottom bracket, as well as a stop so you can run a front derailleur. Okay, let's talk about the cons. The first one is going to be the weight. Without the rasket, I think the bike weighs in at about 30 pounds. With the rasket, it's closer to 33, 34 pounds. So not the lightest bike in its current build. I think you can shed some weight if you get rid of the rasket. remove the fenders. You could probably put fatter tires in there, with those changes, and it might come in under 30 pounds. Other cons, the handlebars are great. I love the shape. I wish they were wider. And for some reason, the clamp diameter is 25.4. This is a con because if you wanted to play with the reach and swap out the stem, it's kind of hard to find a 25.4, threadless stem in 2024. It's kind of a weird spec nowadays, at least in North America. Maybe 25.4 is more common here in the EU. But I'd like to see a wider handlebar with that same sweep and a bigger clamping area. Another con for me is the tires. The stock tires roll great on pavement, but if you're going to take it off-road, if you're really going to take it bike packing, you got to put a wider tire in there. A wider tire will give you better traction and float and just make the ride a lot more supple. The last con is that it only has mounting for a single water bottle. That's going to really limit the distances and tours you're going to do if you can't carry enough water. Granted, you can add things like stem bags, but still, I can see that there are some design challenges, but that's just something to consider. I know it sounds like there are way more cons than pros, but trust me, I like this bike. It's just I'm being nitpicky, just so you know what you're getting into. Some of you have asked, how does it compare to the Rivendell Platypus? They look very similar, but trust me, they're very different. Bikes like the Platypus, the Suzy Longbolts, they have much longer rear chainstays, much bigger tire clearances, and also a slacker, higher trail front end. Those bikes are definitely more oriented towards off-road riding. Probably a closer cousin to this bike would be a bike like the Soma Buena Vista. Although even then the Soma Buena Vista is a little bit different. It does have that true mixed-D split top tube construction. It has a shorter rear end. The Buena Vista, to me, feels a little bit more like a road bike even than this one. So the Airisto falls between those two bikes and probably leans more towards the Soma Buena Vista. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised with how well the bike performed. Any bike with a basket and a step-through design, it's going to raise some eyebrows when you take it touring. But I can assure you this bike is more than capable. With a few tweaks, lower gearing, bigger tires, you can make it into a proper, off-road bike packing machine. Don't let the step-through design scare you off. I do think I was able to get a better fit because of the step-through than as opposed to if I'd ridden the level top tube Henko. We might play around with this bike a little bit more, make it more off-road worthy, depending on how soon the folks at Pelago want the bike back. If you guys enjoyed this deep dive into the Airisto Pelago, please consider supporting the channel. I know I should have mentioned this in the beginning. Yes, Pelago sent the bike over for review, but I'm not getting paid for the review. If you count in our train tickets to Barcelona to pick up the bike, we're already 20 euro in the hole to make this video happen. Literally, the only way we are able to keep this channel going is through sticker sales and through Patreon. So if you want to support the channel, join us on Patreon. That's the best way to do it. And as always, keep the supple side down.